Hey everyone, welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to be tackling IEPs.
Individualized Education Plans.
Oh yeah. IEPs for students with disabilities,
Yeah.
and I think we can all agree they're super important, but also they can be kind of overwhelming.
Right.
So we're going to try to break it all down, focusing on like what you need to know, and we're going to be using a blog post by Dr. Howie Knoff, who's a veteran school psychologist.
Yeah, he's a real expert in special ed law, too.
Perfect guide for our conversation today. So,
Well, it's interesting. Dr. Knopf really cuts through all the, legal jargon by focusing on what he calls the 3 A's.
the 3 A's.
Acceptable, actionable, and appropriate.
Okay.
Really the golden rules for making IEPs that work.
All right, the 3 A's, I'm intrigued. Let's start with acceptable. What makes an IEP acceptable?
Well, an acceptable IEP means everyone involved, especially the parents, they got to agree on it.
Makes sense.
It requires real collaboration, making sure everyone's voice is heard. And there's a great example of this in a case, Chris D. versus Montgomery County Board of Education back in 1990.
Oh, I remember reading about that case.
12-year-old boy with emotional disabilities.
Yeah, he was really struggling.
Really struggling.
And the school wasn't giving him the right support. They were even doing corporal punishment.
Yeah, which only made things worse, of course.
Of course.
Chris's parents knew this wasn't right, and they fought hard for his needs.
Good for them.
It's a landmark example of how parents can and should advocate for their kids.
Yeah.
And the court actually sided with the parents in this case, and this highlighted a crucial part of IDEA. That's the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act.
Okay, so IDEA is the law that guarantees educational rights.
For students with disabilities.
For students with disabilities, so helpful.
Yeah.
What specifically in IDEA helped Chris's parents?
Okay, so there's this thing called the stay put provision.
They put.
It's basically this rule that the student's placement can't change without the parent's consent while they're figuring out any disagreements about the IEP.
Oh, that's so important.
Right, so it prevents like these hasty decisions,
Yeah.
provides some much needed stability for the family.
Oh, absolutely. And it can be such a stressful process.
Yeah, exactly.
This case just really emphasizes to me how important parental advocacy is.
Yeah.
And like knowing your rights under IDEA.
Yeah.
Like it's a cautionary tale for schools too, right? Like take those parental concerns seriously.
Yeah, you said it.
Work together to really make an IEP that helps the student.
It's not just about, the legal stuff.
Right.
It's about open communication and parents and educators making decisions together.
I like that shared decision making.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got acceptable, meaning like agreement and collaboration.
Right.
But what about actionable? What does that even mean? Like, does the school have to actually be ready to like put the plan into action?
That's it. Exactly.
Oh, okay.
Dr. Knopf, he makes this great analogy. It's like reserving a rental car. You might have your confirmation, but if they don't have a car when you get there,
What good is it?
what good is it? Right?
I love that.
So actionable means like in the IEP world, the school's got to have the resources, the staff, the expertise to actually implement the plan.
So it's about actually doing it, not just writing it down.
Putting those words into action, yeah.
Okay, and to further illustrate this point, Dr. Knopf talks about another case. Cory M versus Montgomery County Board of Education, also from 1990.
Same year.
Same year, involves a 13-year-old student.
Named Cory.
Named Cory. Okay, and he was struggling both academically and behaviorally.
Right.
This is the same school district as Christie.
Right. Sharp observation, same district.
Montgomery County.
Yeah, Montgomery County.
Okay, I'm already sensing a pattern here.
Maybe.
Okay, so Cory's story is a bit of a roller coaster ride. So he was initially misdiagnosed as intellectually disabled.
Right.
But then when he was correctly identified as having emotional disabilities, his IEPs were still inadequate.
Yeah, they just weren't cutting it.
So even though they had the diagnosis right, they still didn't have the right support.
That's a key point.
Yeah.
They didn't have the resources or expertise to address his behavioral needs.
Hmm.
The IEPs lacked specific strategies, interventions, and the teachers just weren't equipped to handle it.
That must have been so frustrating for him and his family.
Oh, for sure.
It sounds like he was just falling through the cracks.
Even with an IEP.
Yeah.
Even with an IEP.
And that's why this idea of actionable is so important.
Right.
It's not just about having the plan,
It has to be doable.
The school's got to be able to actually make it happen.
It sounds like a due process hearing was needed in this case.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
To resolve it. I'm not really familiar with what that looks like.
It's basically a formal legal process, right?
Right.
Both the parents and the school, they present their case to like a neutral person.
A judge, kind of.
a hearing officer, and they make the decision.
Okay.
And this is what led to a really significant development in Cory's case.
They brought in Dr. Knopf himself
Oh, wow.
to develop a new IEP.
He wasn't just writing about it. He was actually in there.
She's in the trenches. Yeah.
Making things happen.
That's right. He wasn't just criticizing the system. He wanted to help these students.
Yeah. And I also read that Montgomery County schools were ordered by the court to not only accept Dr. Knopf's new IEP, but to have him train their staff on how to implement it. So they definitely had some learning to do.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Okay, so this case really highlights another interesting thing about IDEA, right?
Okay.
Parents can ask for an independent evaluation.
If they don't agree with the school?
If they disagree with the school's assessment.
Exactly.
But there's no rule for an independent intervention consultation.
That's right.
That's so interesting. So parents can challenge, like, the diagnosis?
Right.
But not the how, the actual support.
That's exactly right. And that's why these cases like Cory's, they're so important because they push us to think, how do we make sure that those expert recommendations are actually used?
Yeah. How are they translated into, like, good teaching practices?
Right.
Okay, so we've covered Acceptable, which is all about agreement and collaboration. Actionable, which means the school has the resources and expertise to actually put that plan into practice.
Right.
Now I feel like the missing piece of the puzzle is appropriate.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
So appropriate goes beyond just having a plan and the resources.
Okay.
It's about making sure the IEP is designed to help the student make real progress,
So it's not just like they're there in the classroom.
Right.
But they're actually learning and growing.
Right, and they're meeting their potential.
Okay, I'm ready to dive into appropriate. This seems like a total game changer for students with disabilities.
It is.
What makes an IEP appropriate, in the eyes of the law?
Okay, well, to understand that, we need to look at this landmark case that went all the way up to the Supreme Court, Endrew F versus Douglas County School District in 2017.
Okay.
And this case really set the precedent for what appropriate progress means for students with disabilities.
This is huge. This sounds like a really crucial case, what happened in Endrew F's situation.
This is the case that really shifted the landscape of special education law in the U.S.
Wow.
So Endrew was a young boy with autism, and his parents, they believed the school just wasn't doing enough to help him reach his potential.
So they weren't happy with his IEP, even though the school was technically following it.
That's exactly it.
Okay.
And the school, they were arguing they were meeting the requirements of IDEA. By giving him some educational benefit.
Okay.
But the Supreme Court was like, hold on.
Not enough.
That's not enough.
They raised the bar.
They raised the bar for what appropriate progress really means.
Okay, so what does that mean?
Well, the court made it clear that IEPs, they got to be ambitious and they got to be individualized. They got to be designed to help those students make appropriate progress, considering their own specific circumstances.
So it's not just like a generic, here's the plan for all students.
Right. It's tailored to the individual student.
It's got to be tailored.
Yeah.
So what does that mean practically? How can schools make sure those IEPs are appropriate?
It starts with really deeply understanding the students' needs, like their strengths, their challenges, what makes them unique, and the goals in the IEP.
Yeah.
They got to be specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound.
Well, like those...
The SMART goals.
SMART goals, yeah.
Not just vague stuff like improve reading, but concrete things.
Yeah.
Achievable steps.
Measurable things.
Right.
Okay.
And those goals, they got to be matched with the right interventions and supports.
Right.
Does the student need assistive technology? Do they need specialized instruction? Behavioral therapy? The IEP should lay all that out.
It's all there.
Right. And the school has to have those things.
To actually provide those things.
To make it happen. Yeah.
This is all making sense to me now.
Good.
It's moving away from that one-size-fits-all approach to education.
Yeah.
To something truly individualized.
And that's where you see the result.
That's where the magic happens.
Yeah. When students feel seen and understood and supported, that's when they can really succeed.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But realistically, creating all these individualized IEPs takes time and money.
Yeah.
Resources expertise.
Yeah.
How do we make sure schools are equipped for all this?
That's $1 million question.
It is.
And it leads to a really crucial point that Dr. Knopf makes in his blog.
Okay.
Budgeting.
Budgeting?
Yeah. School districts are planning for that 2025-2026 school year right now.
Yeah.
They're making those tough decisions about where the money goes.
Okay, so we've got the 3 A's. We've got acceptable, actionable, appropriate. Now we're talking about budgeting. How does it all fit together?
It's all connected.
Yeah.
Remember Dr. Knopf pointed out that nationally, around 14% of students are on IEPs?
That's a lot of kids.
That's a significant portion of the student body.
Yeah.
So when schools are making those budget decisions, they got to accurately assess and prioritize the needs of students with disabilities.
So it's not just about, like, the overall numbers. It's about the individual students.
Right.
And making sure they're getting what they need.
Yeah, making sure there are enough qualified special education teachers, therapist support staff, providing that access to the technology.
And the resources.
And the resources they need.
So budgeting isn't just about numbers.
Right.
It's about making that commitment to inclusive and effective education for all students.
You got it.
Okay, so to bring it back to our listeners, what can we do, both individually and as communities, to make sure special ed is adequately funded and that these IEPs are really effective?
That's a powerful question. I think it starts with awareness. You know, understanding how complex special education is, appreciating what these students need, and recognizing the challenges that schools and families face.
It's about seeing beyond the labels and seeing the potential in every student.
Absolutely. And advocating for change, you know? Contact your small board members, support organizations that champion inclusive education, and speak up for the rights of all students.
Yeah, recognize that education is a shared responsibility. We all have a role to play in making sure that every child reaches their full potential.
I agree.
This has been so insightful. I feel like I've learned so much already.
Me too. It's such a fascinating topic.
We've covered a lot, from the legal foundations of IEPs to the actual realities of implementing them and funding them. But before we wrap up, let's revisit those 3 A's.
Yeah.
Just to make sure they stick with our listeners.
Good idea. That's so important.
Okay, so A, number 1, acceptable. The IEP has to be agreed upon by everyone involved, especially the parents.
Right.
Collaboration, communication, making sure everyone's voice is heard. Yeah, you said it perfectly.
And A number 2, actionable.
Okay.
The school has to have the resources, the staff, and the expertise to actually put the IEP into practice.
Right.
Turning those words into action, making sure that plan is more than just a piece of paper.
Absolutely.
And finally, A number 3, appropriate.
Okay.
The IEP has to be ambitious, individualized, and designed to help the student make meaningful progress.
Right.
Setting high expectations and providing truly tailored support to help each student thrive.
Those 3 A's really sum it up.
They do.
Yeah.
And all these legal cases we discuss, they really played a big role in shaping how we understand these 3 A's. But it makes me wonder, what about the students themselves?
Oh, that's a good point.
What role did they play in this whole IEP process?
That's a great question, and it often gets overlooked. You know,
Yeah.
students, especially as they get older, they should be active participants in those IEP meetings.
Yeah.
And have a say in their own educational goal.
It's their education.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. But I imagine it can be intimidating for a student, especially one with a disability, to speak up in a meeting with adults and advocate for their needs.
Absolutely. That's why it's so important for educators and parents to create a supportive and welcoming environment
Right.
where students feel comfortable sharing their thoughts and ideas.
Yeah.
It's about empowering them to become self-advocates.
Self-advocacy skills are essential, not just for navigating the education system, but for life in general.
That's right.
But how can we help students develop those skills?
Well, there are lots of ways, role-playing different scenarios, practicing communication skills, and helping students understand their own strengths and challenges are all great places to start.
It's like giving them the tools and the confidence to be in charge of their own education.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about the role of parents, educators, the legal system, even the students themselves. But there's one more piece I think we need to consider.
Okay.
The community.
Oh, yeah.
What role can communities play in supporting students with disabilities and their families?
That's such a crucial piece of the puzzle. Communities can provide a network of support resources and understanding.
Yeah.
Think about after-school programs, mentorship opportunities, or even just a friendly face at the grocery store who gets it, who understands the challenges these families face.
It's about creating a culture of inclusion and acceptance.
Yes.
That goes beyond just the classroom walls.
Precisely when communities rally around students with disabilities, it sends such a powerful message that they're valued and supported and they belong.
I love that it's a reminder that we all have a role to play in building a more inclusive and equitable society for everyone.
Absolutely.
We've covered so much today,
Yeah.
from understanding the 3 A's of effective IEPs to exploring the roles of parents, educators, students, and communities in this whole process.
Yeah, it's been a really enlightening conversation.
But as we wrap up our deep dive today, I'm left with a question for our listeners, something to ponder as you go about your day.
We've explored the legal stuff, the 3 A's, how important collaboration is, and the power of community. But what's next for special education?
What are the big questions we should be asking to make sure that every student with a disability is getting a truly individualized and effective education?
Man, that's a great question to end on. It really makes me think about how far we've come in terms of recognizing and supporting these students, but also how far we still have to go.
Yeah, I'm thinking about all the different people involved,
Yeah.
parents, educators, policymakers, even the students themselves. What advice would you give to each of them as they try to navigate this whole system?
Hmm. To the parents, I'd say, be your child's champion. Learn about your rights. Don't be afraid to ask questions and really advocate for your child's needs.
I like that.
And to the educators, I'd say, embrace each student's individuality. An IEP, it's not one size fits all.
Right.
Be creative, be flexible, and be willing to go that extra mile.
That's such great advice. It's like an IEP. It's a living document. It should be changing as the students' needs change.
Mm.
Okay, so what about policymakers? What's their role in all of this?
Well, they control the money, right?
Right.
They can allocate those resources, create laws that help these kids, and make sure that schools have the funding and support they need to really implement these programs.
Yeah, it seems like there's a real need to bridge that gap between like the policy and what's actually happening in the schools.
Absolutely. And we can't forget about the students.
Yeah.
I encourage them to be active participants in their education. Speak up, share your goals, and advocate for what you need. You are your own best advocate.
That's so important. It's about empowering these students to take charge of their learning and shape their own futures. I love that. This has been such an eye-opening conversation. I hope it's given our listeners a lot to think about.
I agree. It's been a pleasure talking about this with you.
As we wrap up our deep dive today, I want to leave everyone with a final thought. We've talked about the laws, the practical challenges, and working together, but it really comes down to something much simpler, believing in the potential of every student, no matter their disability.
Well said. When we approach education with that mindset of inclusion and a belief in possibility, we can create a world where every student can thrive.
That's it for our deep dive today, everyone. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep into the topics that matter most. And remember the journey towards a more inclusive world. It starts with each of us.